Sister Maria Esperanza arrived at the Convent of Sacred Hearts on a rain-soaked Tuesday in October, carrying nothing but a worn suitcase and secrets too heavy for her 19 years. The ancient stone walls seemed to whisper warnings as she walked through corridors that had sheltered broken souls for over 2 centuries. Mother Superior Catherine observed the young woman's trembling hands during evening prayers, noting how she clutched her rosary like a lifeline. The other sisters whispered among themselves another runaway. They assumed, seeking refuge from some unnamed tragedy. They had seen her type before, young women fleeing abusive relationships, unwanted pregnancies, or simply the crushing weight of a world that had forgotten how to be gentle. But there was something different about this one. Something in the way her eyes held both profound sadness and an inexplicable light that made even the most cynical among them pause. As the weeks passed, Maria moved through her duties with mechanical precision, scrubbing floors, tending the gardens, preparing meals in complete silence. She attended every prayer service, but never joined the communal singing, her lips moving silently while her voice remained locked away. The other sisters began to wonder if she had taken a private vow of silence, though no such arrangement had been made official. Block 2. The weight of silence. 3 months into her stay, the convent faced its first crisis. Young Tommy Rodriguez, a 7-year-old from the nearby neighborhood, had been struck by a car while chasing his ball into the street. His mother, Isabella, a single parent who cleaned offices at night, brought him to the convent's infirmary in desperation. The local hospital had turned them away due to lack of insurance. Dr. Sarah Chen, the volunteer physician who visited twice weekly, worked tirelessly to stabilize the boy, but his injuries were severe. Internal bleeding, possible brain trauma. He needed surgery that only a major medical center could provide. Isabella knelt beside his bed, her tears falling on his small, still face as she whispered prayers in Spanish and English, begging God for a miracle. Maria stood in the doorway, watching this scene of raw human anguish unfold. Her own hands began to shake as memories flooded back. Another hospital room, another child fighting for life, another mother's desperate prayers going unanswered. The weight of her silence felt suddenly unbearable, like chains around her throat that had been growing tighter with each passing day. That night, she couldn't sleep. She walked the convent's halls, past the chapel where she had knelt in wordless prayer for months, past the kitchen where she had chopped vegetables in meditative silence, past the garden where she had pulled weeds while her heart pulled apart at the seams. Block 3. The breaking point. The next morning brought devastating news. Tommy's condition had worsened overnight, and Dr. Chen delivered the grim prognosis to Isabella with tears in her own eyes. The boy needed immediate transfer to Children's Hospital downtown, but the ambulance ride alone would cost more than Isabella made in 2 months. The surgery would require tens of thousands of dollars up front. Isabella collapsed into herself, her sobs echoing through the infirmary halls. The other sisters gathered around her, offering what comfort they could, but words felt inadequate against such overwhelming despair. They had already pooled their modest resources, barely enough to cover the ambulance fee, let alone the surgery. Maria stood apart from the group, her entire body trembling as she watched this mother face the impossible choice between her child's life and financial ruin. The parallels to her own past were suffocating. The same helplessness, the same crushing weight of circumstances beyond anyone's control. She thought of her own voice, locked away for so long, and wondered if silence had become not just her refuge but her prison. Mother Superior Catherine noticed Maria's distress and approached her quietly. "Child, I know you carry your own burden," she whispered, "but sometimes, sharing our pain with others helps us bear it." Maria looked into the older woman's kind eyes and felt something shift inside her chest, a crack in the wall she had built around her heart. Block 4. The first word. Later that afternoon, as Isabella sat beside Tommy's bed, reading him a story in Spanish, her voice broke. She couldn't continue, overcome by the reality that these might be among the last stories she would ever read to her son. The book fell from her trembling hands, and she buried her face in her palms, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Maria stepped forward from the shadows where she had been standing, unnoticed. She picked up the Fallen Buka collection of fairy tales with colorful illustrations and, for the first time in 8 months, she opened her mouth to speak. The words came out as barely a whisper, rusty from disuse. "May I?" Isabella looked up, startled. She had never heard Maria speak before, had assumed, like the others, that she had taken some vow of silence. Through her tears, she nodded, unable to find words of her own. Maria settled into the chair beside the bed and opened the book to where Isabella had left off. "Once upon a time," Maria began, her voice gaining strength with each word, "there lived a brave little prince who could speak to the stars." As she read, something miraculous happened. Tommy's vital signs, which had been erratic all morning, began to stabilize. His breathing deepened, and for the first time since the accident, a peaceful expression crossed his small face. Block 5. The ripple effect word of what had happened spread through the convent like wildfire. The sisters whispered in amazement, not just that Maria had finally spoken, but that her voice seemed to carry an inexplicable power. Dr. Chen, ever the scientist, dismissed it as coincidence. But she couldn't deny that Tommy's improvement had begun the moment Maria started reading. Over the next few days, Maria continued reading to Tommy, and with each story his condition improved incrementally. But more than that, her presence seemed to bring peace to the entire infirmary ward. Other patients, elderly residents from the neighborhood who came for basic medical care, began asking specifically for Maria to sit with them during their treatments. Mrs. Eleanor Vasquez, an 80-year-old woman battling cancer, had been inconsolable since her diagnosis. She hadn't eaten in days and refused to take her medications, having lost all will to fight. When Maria sat beside her bed and simply began talking, sharing memories of her grandmother's garden, describing the changing seasons, speaking of hope in the quiet voice she was slowly rediscovering, Mrs. Vasquez reached for her hand. "Mia," the old woman whispered, "your voice, it carries God's mercy." For the first time in weeks, Mrs. Vasquez took her medication and asked for some soup. The other sisters watched in wonder as Maria's gentle words seemed to breathe life back into those who had given up hope. Block 6. The revelation. As Maria's reputation spread beyond the convent walls, people began arriving at their door seeking not just medical care, but the comfort of her presence. She would sit with grieving widows, speak softly to frightened children, and offer words of encouragement to those facing seemingly impossible circumstances. Her voice had become a beacon of hope in a community that had known too much despair. But with this newfound purpose came unexpected challenges. Late one evening, as Maria sat in the chapel reflecting on the day's events, Mother Superior Catherine joined her in the pew. The older woman had been observing Maria's transformation with both joy and concern, recognizing the signs of someone running from their past while simultaneously being called to their future. "You have a gift, child," Mother Catherine said gently, "but gifts often come with stories. The other sisters wonder about your journey here, about why you've kept silent for so long. They see how you flinch when parents cry over their children, how your hands shake when you speak of loss." Maria's eyes filled with tears as she realized she couldn't continue helping others heal, while her own wounds remained festering in darkness. "I had a daughter," Maria whispered, the words barely audible in the sacred space. "Her name was Alina. She would have been 8 years old next month." Mother Catherine remained silent, understanding that some confessions require only the gift of listening. Block 7. The painful truth. Maria's story poured out in fragments, like water through a broken dam. She had been 17 when Alina was born, a teenage mother abandoned by her boyfriend and rejected by her family. Despite the challenges, she had built a life for herself and her daughter, working 2 jobs, attending night school, dreaming of a better future for both of them. Alina had been everything: bright, curious, full of laughter that could fill any room. She loved stories, just like Tommy, and would beg Maria to read to her every night before bed. "Tell me about the princess who saved herself," Mama Alina would say, her dark eyes wide with wonder. Those had been the happiest years of Maria's life, despite their struggles. Then came the accident. Alina had been playing in their apartment building's courtyard when a drunk driver lost control, crashing through the fence and into the small playground. Maria had been at work, studying for her GED during her break, when she received the call. By the time she reached the hospital, it was too late. Alina died in her arms, her small hand growing cold as Maria whispered every story she could remember. desperate to give her daughter's spirit something beautiful to carry into whatever came next. The guilt had been unbearable. If she had been there, if she had been watching, if she had chosen a different apartment, a different job, a different life, the what-ifs had consumed her until she could no longer bear the sound of her own voice. The voice that had failed to save the one person who mattered most. Block 8. The healing begins in the days following her confession. Maria felt both exposed and oddly liberated. Mother Catherine had listened without judgment, offering only gentle guidance and the assurance that grief was not a sin to be hidden, but a love that needed honoring. The other sisters, gradually learning pieces of Maria's story, surrounded her with quiet support, understanding now why her compassion ran so deep. Tommy's recovery continued to progress remarkably. Dr. Chen, while still skeptical of any supernatural explanations, couldn't argue with the results. The boy had not only survived his injuries, but was showing signs of full recovery. His mother, Isabella, had become one of Maria's strongest advocates, telling anyone who would listen about the young woman whose voice had somehow called her son back from the brink. But the real breakthrough came when Maria finally visited Tommy while he was awake and alert. The boy, propped up in his hospital bed with bandages still covering half his head, looked at her with bright, knowing eyes. "You're the story lady," he said with a weak but genuine smile. "My mama says you have a magic voice. Will you read to me again?" As Maria opened the familiar book of fairy tales, she felt Elena's presence in a way she hadn't allowed herself to experience since the accident. Her daughter lived on in every story shared, every child comforted, every moment of wonder and hope she could help create. Her voice hadn't failed. Elena had been Elena's gift to the world, passed through her mother's words to touch other lives. Block 9. The ripple spreads. News of the miracle at the convent began attracting attention from local media. Reporters wanted to interview Maria, to understand the phenomenon that seemed to be transforming their community. But Maria, still fragile in her healing, declined all requests for publicity. Instead, she focused on the growing number of people who came seeking not fame or spectacle, but simply the comfort of being heard. A support group formed organically in the convent's community room. Parents who had lost children, individuals facing terminal diagnoses, families struggling with addiction, they came together weekly, drawn by Maria's ability to hold space for their pain without trying to fix or minimize it. She had learned that sometimes the most powerful healing comes not from having answers, but from bearing witness to suffering with compassion. Dr. Chen, despite her scientific training, found herself profoundly moved by what she witnessed. She began volunteering additional hours at the convent, not just to provide medical care but to study the psychological and emotional healing she was observing. "There's something about authentic vulnerability," she told her colleagues at the hospital. "When someone has walked through their own darkness and emerged with their heart intact, they can hold space for others in a way that clinical training alone cannot teach." The convent itself began to transform. What had once been primarily a place of refuge became a center of healing and hope. The sisters, inspired by Maria's courage to speak her truth, began sharing their own stories of loss, trauma, and redemption. Block 10. The calling becomes clear 6 months after Tommy's accident. Maria faced a decision that would shape the rest of her life. The bishop had heard about her work and was considering asking her to take formal vows to become an official sister of the order. It would mean security, structure, a clear path forward within the church's hierarchy. But Maria felt called in a different direction. "I think Elena sent me here not to hide, but to learn," she told Mother Catherine during one of their evening walks through the convent gardens. "I needed to find my voice again before I could use it to help others find theirs." The older woman smiled, having suspected this day would come. "The walls of this convent were never meant to contain your gift, child. They were meant to nurture it until you were ready to carry it into the world." Maria's plan was both simple and ambitious. She wanted to start a non-profit organization focused on grief counseling and support, particularly for parents who had lost children. She would combine her natural empathy with formal training in psychology and social work, creating a bridge between clinical treatment and spiritual healing. The convent would remain her home base, but her ministry would extend far beyond its walls. Tommy, now fully recovered and back in school, had become one of her biggest supporters. "Miss Maria," he told her during one of his visits to the convent. "You saved my life with your stories. Now you should go save other people too." His words, spoken with the innocent wisdom of childhood, confirmed what Maria already knew in her heart. Block 11. The new beginning. 1 year after her arrival at the Convent of Sacred Hearts, Maria stood before a gathering of supporters, donors, and community members for the official launch of the Alina Foundation. Named in honor of her daughter, the organization would provide free grief counseling, support groups, and advocacy for families facing medical crises. Maria's voice, once locked away in silence, now carried across the room with confidence and purpose. "Grief is not something to be cured or fixed," she said, looking out at faces that had become familiar over the months: Isabella and Tommy, Mrs. Vasquez, Dr. Chen, and countless others, whose lives had intersected with hers during her journey back to wholeness. "It's something to be honored, to be held, to be transformed into a force for healing in the world." The Foundation's first major initiative would be establishing a network of trained grief counselors in underserved communities, ensuring that no parent would have to face the loss of a child without support. They would also work to improve access to pediatric medical care, preventing tragedies like Tommy's near-death experience from becoming fatal due to financial barriers. As the evening ended and people began to disperse, Maria found herself alone in the convent chapel where she had spent so many silent nights wrestling with her pain. Now, in the flickering candlelight, she spoke aloud to Alina for the first time since the accident. "I understand now, Mia," she whispered, her voice strong and clear. "You didn't leave me. You just went ahead to light the way." The silence that followed felt different than the silence she had carried for so long, not empty, but full of possibility. Her daughter's laughter seemed to echo in the sacred space, a reminder that love never truly dies but transforms, finding new ways to touch the world through those who dare to speak its truth. Maria rose from her knees, ready to step into whatever came next, her voice finally free to carry the message she was born to share, that even in the depths of loss, hope could be reborn, and that sometimes the most broken hearts become the most powerful instruments of healing.